What up, y'all? My name is Angelica Rubio, State Rep for District 35 here in Las Cruces, and I am here to talk to you about the special session. So a special session, you might ask. Why? What's happening? So yesterday, we got notice that we're having to go back to Santa Fe on July 18th to address some public safety pieces of legislation that the governor is considering, things that I have very strong feelings about. And so one, I don't want to go back to Santa Fe. Two, the things that are being considered are pieces of policy that I do not believe will actually address any of the public safety issues that folks around the community, around the state, and in fact around the country are dealing with every single day over the course of the last few years. One of those things is managing individuals who are facing really immense mental health issues, primarily because we don't have adequate mental health services here in the state of New Mexico. We've been working really hard to rebuild all of that, and it's not moving fast enough. And so in the meantime, you have people who have been needing mental health services for a long time, aren't receiving those services, and are also responsible for committing crime in this community. And so the only way that the governor and tough on crime people feel like they need to do is locking them up. The second thing is that the governor is also considering legalizing panhandling. I actually meant making panhandling illegal, which is absurd, but also being considered in other communities throughout the state. But it's being used now as a way to, how do we make it safer for the people who are panhandling? So it's kind of changing the narrative to say, oh, well, we just want to keep panhandlers safe. But in reality, it's really about how do we find a loophole to keep people off the streets asking and begging for money or for food, which we should be providing through other avenues, as maybe implementing and supporting social services, housing. What's fascinating in this entire process, especially if you're following New Mexico politics, is that this is also an election year. All of us, me, my other state representative colleagues, the state senate, they're all up for re-election except the governor. And so we're having this special session after the primary on June 4th, but before the November election. And we're hearing pieces of legislation during the special session that we already heard debate on during the 30-day session. The bills were actually killed, never made it out of committee in most cases. Which means that we're gonna go up to Santa Fe on July 18th, spend $12,000 a day, probably for a couple of days, to essentially and potentially kill legislation that we had already killed in January and February. And so I share all of that with you all because I don't believe that this has anything to do with actually addressing public safety or investing and providing for our community. It's just optics. It's to say, oh, I tried to do something and therefore the legislature didn't, and so there are consequences to that. And so I'm sharing this all with you all because one, it's important, but two, because I see this so often in my life already. I'm gonna be 45 years old. I've been following politics for as long as I can remember, and it never fails that particularly Democrats, we get so freaked out about elections and about short-term goals and ideas that we never tend to look forward about how detrimental pieces of legislation like this are to our communities. And or we do know, but because it's not politically viable, we don't pursue other alternatives. By us passing these policies means that, yeah, you'll see people win their re-elections, but they will have long-lasting effects on our communities, issues that we will never really be able to come back from within my generation, and maybe yours. So do what you will with that information. And I hope that between now and July 18th, you can reach out to your legislative representatives and senators and urge them to vote no on any of these pieces of legislation. And instead, let us, the legislature, the legislative branch, work through the interim to actually do the research, do the necessary things that we need to do so that we can have some really good, viable pieces of legislation ready to go in the 60-day session come next January.